Oh, that is so much better. Tenet is written and directed by Christopher Nolan and stars John David Washington, Robert Pattinson, Kenneth Branagh and Elizabeth Debicki. And the plot of the movie, I'm going to be honest, is really hard to talk about without spoiling anything, so all I'm going to say about the plot is that it is a spy espionage thriller that revolves around time inversion, which basically means there are certain things and people that are able to move in reverse. That is all I'm going to say. Now, I, like most people, were genuinely really excited when Tenet was initially announced, because, hell, it's another Christopher Nolan movie, and this movie looks as if it's going to be one of his most complex movies to date. However, thanks to the way 2020 has played out and lockdown, etc., a lot of people, including myself, didn't know whether Tenet was actually going to be released or not. However, thanks to the way everything has panned out, Tenet is finally released, and I was able to see it in a proper cinema, which is the first time I've been to a cinema since March. I think the last film I saw in a theatre was The Invisible Man. And yes, it was a weird experience. There were only 5 to 6 other people in the screening room along with me. And yeah, this was one hell of a movie to come back to the cinemas with, because Christopher Nolan has definitely outdone himself in terms of spectacle and sheer over-the-top concepts. He has really outdone himself in those two departments, because this is probably one of his most ambitious and also biggest movies I think he's ever done. I have to start off by talking about the set pieces in this movie, because I feel like these are some of the largest and most bombastic set pieces Christopher Nolan has ever done. I wouldn't necessarily say they're as enthralling as some of his previous set pieces, like the hallway fight in Inception, or some of the stuff you see in Dunkirk or the Dark Knight trilogy. I wouldn't say they're as engaging as that, but they are still incredibly inventive and unlike anything I've seen in a movie before. Because what Christopher Nolan is able to get away with in terms of manipulating the perspective of time in this film and how that really plays into the action set pieces throughout this movie is really cleverly done. And the way that whole aspect of the movie is executed really is a breath of fresh air. It's something that you haven't really seen before in a movie, and it genuinely was really fun to watch. The score is also really damn good as well. It's done by Ludwig Göransson, who did the score for Black Panther. And to be honest, if you didn't know he did the score, you would pretty much think that Hans Zimmer did the score for this movie. Because it does sound very similar to Zimmer's previous work on Christopher Nolan's other films, which isn't a bad thing. Göransson isn't blatantly copying Zimmer's style, he's basically just taking a lot of influence from his previous work on Nolan's films, and it works really well here, and there's some really cool uses of instruments and certain sounds being played backwards, which really do work well for certain dramatic scenes later on in the film. And yeah, I thought it worked really well for the sake of the movie. The cast are all really good as well. John David Washington is really investing and really, really good as the protagonist. That is his character's name. He does not have a normal name in this film. He is literally just referred to as the protagonist, which was a bit odd and took a bit of getting used to, but his performance is good enough as the protagonist that the name didn't really bother me after a while. Robert Pattinson is brilliant in this film, and so is Elizabeth Debicki and Kenneth Branagh, who plays this incredibly over-the-top Russian bad guy. There are certain points in the film where you would think the over-the-top nature of his performance would maybe hinder the movie, but it actually all works perfectly for this movie. It never feels too over-the-top. His performance is just the right level of over-the-topness that it still works for the sake of the film. Elizabeth Debicki is really good as his character's wife. And yeah, overall, the casting in this movie and the acting is spot on. Now, I'm going to be honest, Tenet is not Christopher Nolan's best movie to date. It is still very enjoyable, and just in terms of pure spectacle and proving that this concept works and delivers some very inventive set pieces, in those two aspects, this movie works really well and is incredibly entertaining to watch. However, I'd be lying to you if I didn't say that this movie didn't work for me in a few different areas. For example, the first half of this movie did worry me. It's very choppy, and it didn't exactly click with me to begin with. The way it kind of bounces from place to place, expecting you to kind of go along with it in the first half of the film, wasn't working. I thought it was very clunky, very choppy, and I was very worried that the whole film was going to be like that. However, everything changed after one specific scene that happens halfway through the film. I won't say any specifics as to what scene it is, but trust me, you will know exactly what scene it is when it happens, and once that scene, halfway through the movie, happens, the movie then suddenly starts to open up and fully embrace its concept more than it did in the first half. And from that point on, I was fully on board with what this movie had to offer. Because like I said, the first half of the movie, I was slightly worried that it was going to maintain this very choppy, clunky approach in terms of how it wanted to tell its story. But from the halfway point onwards, it is pretty damn brilliant. It fully embraces its concept, and everything from the halfway point onwards, I was kind of thinking to myself, yes, this is exactly what I was wanting to see from the word go. And yeah, everything in the second half of the movie is 10 times better than the stuff that happens at the start. And not to say that the first half of the movie is bad, it's just very all over the place and very choppily executed. I've heard some people refer to this movie as Christopher Nolan's most complex and complicated movie to date, and I can kind of understand where they're coming from, but for me, the complexity of this film is very similar to, say, Memento or even Inception. After one initial viewing, you will get the general gist of what has gone on, but it will take about 2 or 3 more viewings to fully appreciate and understand every single thing that is on display in this movie. Like I said, the general gist of the story you will get after one viewing, but if you want to fully understand how this movie works and understand the intricacies of its story and how Christopher Nolan has pulled this off, then yeah, 2 or 3 viewings will be needed to fully understand how this movie actually works. There is also one aspect to this movie that I've been thinking about more and more after I've seen it, and it does slightly annoy me, and it annoys me more here than it does with any other Christopher Nolan movie. Because if you've seen any of Christopher Nolan's previous films, you will know that he focuses a lot more on story than he does character. And with his other movies, it's kind of passable, because there is either a reason for that happening, or the very little character development and emotion he's trying to get out of the character actually does come from the story he's trying to tell. Whereas this movie is full on story and like 1% character, which again, that didn't bother me while I was watching the movie, but in the long term, it does make me think, because, like, you have this main character, the protagonist, which, again, is performed really well. John David Washington in the role is fantastic, but I don't know anything about him. Essentially, I don't actually care that much about him. As a main character, he works for the sake of the story, but that's about it. You don't know anything about him. You don't really know who he is or what really the purpose of him being there is. And in the long run, he is just there for the sake of the plot. And like I said, there are previous Nolan movies like Inception where the very little character stuff that he does do is there for the sake of the plot. For example, like with Inception, Don Cobb's reason for doing the job that he's doing is to do with his wife, and that kind of strengthens his character a bit more, and he wants to see his kids. That whole thing makes his character ever so slightly more interesting. Whereas this, you don't know anything about the main character. You don't quite know why he's there, therefore it doesn't really give you much to cling on to in terms of character development or emotional investment of said character. In the end, Tenet is Christopher Nolan doing what Christopher Nolan does best. It's pure spectacle with some very inventive set pieces that are all done in camera and practically, with a complex story and a very ambitious concept that works the more the movie goes on. However, like I said, the first half of the movie felt very choppy to me, and it's not until the second half of the film where it fully embraces its concept and delivers exactly what I was expecting to see in this movie and gets better from that point onwards. You also have the issue with the lack of a real attachment to the main character and other things like that that do hold it back from being one of Christopher Nolan's best movies, which is why I think I'm going to give Tenet an 8. I was strongly considering a 7.5 for this movie, but I think the pure spectacle and grand feel of the movie, along with how it pulls off such a unique concept, ever so slightly bumps it up to an 8. I wouldn't be surprised if it dips back down to a 7.5 in the future, but at this point it's like teetering between 8 and 7.5. So guys, that was my review of Tenet. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've seen the film, then please let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. Obviously keep spoilers to a minimal, because there are some people that haven't seen the movie yet. But if you like the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Bye.